Hello again, YouTube. Tad Atkinson, the Grognard DM here, and I just wanted to kind of follow up a little bit on some of my thoughts last time on some of the ways that they built the concept of declaring player intentions into combat in various game systems. Last time I talked about the difference between modern approaches to role-playing games, especially modern D&D, meaning 3.0 plus, and AD&D BECMI, also known as OD&D, second edition AD&D to a certain extent as well. Um, and as I was talking about it, I realized there was another way that was kind of worked in that kind of bridges the two approaches, I think. In the West End Games Star Wars version, which was a D6 based game. Everything was a pool of six-sided dice. Very simple game to play, actually. If you love looking into retro games, I would highly recommend you track that down. West End Games Star Wars, also known as the D6 Star Wars. I think there's a website called Jedi Holocron that has most of the core books on that. And what they did was every attribute was rated, number of six-sided dice that you would roll, and basically the highest perception score or attribute among the player characters would kind of roll for the initiative against the perception dice of the GM characters. And whoever had the higher perception got to choose whether they're going to act first or act second. But then, going in order of the dex scores, the side that was going to act first would declare how many actions they were taking and what they were doing. And it would go from highest dex to lowest dex. Excuse me, lowest dex to highest dex. So obviously, those who had a greater speed of reaction reflected by their dex score would be able to anticipate what their comrades were going to do and adjust accordingly. And then actions were resolved in order of highest dex to lowest dex. Now, the interesting thing was it was one action at a time. You could declare any number of actions in the West End Games rendition of Star Wars, so long as you had the dice to be able to do it. If you had a blaster score of 7 dice and you wanted to take 8 shots, well, sorry, you've only got 7 dice in blaster. Every action after the first declared action would subtract 1 die from all of your skills, regardless. This made force points very powerful. Again, if you're interested, I highly recommend this game. But the point being is that everybody took turns. So if everybody was taking, say, 2 actions, but you had one guy who had a whole bunch of dice, like a Han Solo type guy, and he was going to take 8 actions. He resolved his first action, and everybody got their first action. Then the other side gets theirs. And then second actions are taken, both sides. Then third, and so on, until all actions for that round have been taken. It made combat a lot more even, in that even though you might have somebody that it was a dice monkey or really focused, and so had one action he could do really, really, really well, he wasn't going to say blaster skill, since it's a combat skill. He wasn't going to blow away all the opposition before they could even react. He'd take out one, but they still got a shot. And so he still might get taken down on that first shot. It made combat a little bit more even for both sides. First edition, because of the way surprise worked, literally surprise was more than half the battle, really. If you got a good amount of surprise on even a mighty dragon, there was a really good chance, even if you were a relatively low-level party, of winning, because you just had so many possible actions against that dragon before it would even be able to roll for initiative. And then, of course, this has evolved over time more to almost everybody takes their turn type of initiative. And I would say probably the one thing that I have with the more modern approach, generally speaking, is it becomes a little too turn-based, which is kind of a strange way of putting it, but because initiative is not re-rolled, and I understand because it's a great administrative technique to simply have a standard initiative and everybody rolls their own individual initiative. Doing that every round would make this pretty problematic because you've got that every round now, determining the marching order, as it were, as far as who's going to attack when. But coming at it from an old school perspective like I do, where initiative can change sides in the middle of a combat, we see this even in real life warfare. Somebody who starts off strong in a battle, you can see it throughout history. Suddenly something happens, the tide turns, and the aggressive side loses the initiative, and the other side's able to take it, and suddenly what was looking like a losing battle becomes a winning battle for that side that initially lost an initiative. Well, that sounds strange. But at any rate, one of the things that I've been playing a little bit more often, or would play more often if I had more players wanting to get into the crunchiness of it, is the 5th edition HackMaster game. And the way initiative works in that one is the combat is second-based, so it's more cinematic in that one. That's what I like about it. You start off at second 1, the DM just keeps counting up the seconds. There's no turns. You just keep going. You're able to act every so often, and there it is until the end of combat. The die you roll at the start of combat, is, in terms of initiative, is the first second you're actually able to be aware, oh, I'm in combat, I need to do something, aside from walking along blithely, ignoring everything going on around me. So it is possible, based on preparedness, or lack thereof, to have wind up rolling a very high die, like a 12-sider, to determine your initiative, whereas an uncanny rogue or an elf or in a natural terrain or something, or a ranger, is a little bit more aware of surroundings, and so they're rolling maybe a 4-sider for initiative. And then your weapons have weapon speeds, which is kind of a nice throwback to original D&D, but that weapon speed is how many seconds it takes for you to wind up and make a second or third or whatever attack once you've engaged. Bows have a rate of fire every so many seconds, but while you're reloading, since you're not engaged, you can be moving every second to reposition yourself for a better shot, or to stay out of melee, as the case may be. Mages, they've got a downtime between casting spells where they're fatigued and they're very vulnerable at that point. So that's another tactical consideration, but mages can't be casting a spell every single second. They have to recover from their last casting, and the more powerful the spell, the longer the recovery time is. There are several other things about HackMaster that I like, but I'm kind of right now focusing on the initiative and running combat perspective of the various games that I'm familiar with. Probably the worst, most nonsensical combat system in terms of determining who takes actions when, that I've ever run into, is the FASA Star Trek role-playing game. They had action points. You got so many based on your dexterity attribute, and it was very loosey-goosey in terms of what cost how many action points, and given that it's a 10-second round, sometimes the action points were a little unrealistic as far as what a Star Trek character, because even if you watch this, you could actually watch the series with a stopwatch and see how long Kirk Fu took to accomplish something, or how long it took for them to train and fire a phaser, or all kinds of stuff. And didn't look like anybody fast had ever done anything like that, much less see how far they can move in a 10-second period. So I would consider that one the worst one. There are so many things I liked about the FASA Star Trek game. Combat was not one of them at all. And again, you move away, as you move more towards individual initiative, I've noticed, the more your intentions, that coordination phase at the beginning of a combat round becomes less and less of a factor. Going back to HackMaster, one thing, especially with spellcasters, it's assumed that when your second is called, that you're ready to go, which is very much old school. And if you don't, you have to roll to see what your delay is because you're fumbling around in your pouches for spell components while you're trying to make up your mind what spell you want to cast, which is kinder than the way most DMs would run it, which is, okay, you're done. You obviously didn't know what spell to cast, so next. Or in the old school D&D format, your people saying, okay, well, I guess Joe Schmo over here can't figure out what spell he wants to cast, so he's not doing anything this round, DM. All right. You need to be a little bit more with it as a spellcaster. And I think that's a general rule. Spellcasters can completely bog down a game, and if you want to play a spellcaster, it's kind of, the onus is on you to know what spells you can cast, what they do, so that you've got that ready to go when it's your turn to declare what you're doing, whether it's because it's an initiative-based activity cycle, or we're doing a intentions phase for declaration, or whatever it may be. This is true generally of any character. Know what your character can do, but it's harder for a DM like me that wants everybody to have their fair chance. We never want to be hard noses, I guess it is. But there it is. It is what it is, and as I said, there was that one player, that wasn't entirely on me. I should have just simply told him, yep, you lost your initiative. So in terms of initiatives, what's my kind of final takeaway as I'm coming up on the amount of time that I want to do one of these videos? It really is, like so many other aspects about role-playing games, about what you enjoy. I personally do enjoy the intentions phase. If I were to homebrew my own first edition campaign world, I would probably go ahead and do individual initiatives. We'd roll d6s like they do, but we would start with the intentions phase so that everybody knows what it is they're doing. And then we roll for initiative. And because it's simpler, high goes first. So everybody's rolling a d6, they're adding their reaction adjustment to it. Actually, I probably would increase it to a d10 or a d12, so there's more variable, because otherwise there'd be a lot of ties with a d6, especially if everybody's got very similar dexes. And then each side resolves their combat in order of that particular roll. I'd have to play with it to see it, to see how that would work. Because it is, I'm one of those guys that a lot of people come to for the retro games. This is one reason why I'm doing some of these videos, I guess. And so a lot of the players that I have coming to my table these days have never played first edition. They've only played third edition and fifth edition. Honestly, I do not personally know anyone who has ever played fourth edition D&D. I know it was played because it did sell, but I personally don't know anybody that, at least that they've admitted to me, that have played fourth edition. But 3.5 Pathfinder, of course, so with that newer logic, they find I've spent a lot of time explaining the combat approaches because it is, if you're used to, I'm rolling a d20, I'm adding all of my combat modifiers in, and I need to find out whether I hit an armor class that is basically like a DC. And I'm rolling initiative on an individual basis. Going to a first edition where it's the intentions and so on and so forth is definitely counterintuitive, and I spend a lot of time explaining that. And then I saw somebody asking for an objective explanation of the two approaches. I love third, fifth Pathfinder editions. I've had limited experience with fifth edition and only as a player. I've never run it. I've enjoyed all of my encounters, and that honestly is the bottom line. Is a game fun to play? If it's fun to play, it's a good game, and I've enjoyed fifth edition on those few occasions I've had to play it, or opportunities that I have had to play it. I don't want to make it sound like it was forced or anything. and so therefore it's a good game. My first love will always be first edition AD&D. So that's always my favorite one to run. That is my favorite one to play. And I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it's different, and it just happens to be one of my personal favorites. So take that for what you will, and I will catch you on the next time. Until then, may all your hits be crits, and roll like it's your last roll in life.